So welcome everyone to the sixth of seven talks with Delson and Forrest. And tonight's, or sorry, for you, it's today's topic is about meditation in the householder life. And so I'm going to kick it off by asking both Delson and Forrest to define what they consider to be a householder, because it's not a word we use every day, although in meditation circles it is. But before that, I just want to mention that next week, the last talk is going to be about collaboration, potential collaboration between Forrest and Delson, and potentially a retreat. And so next week we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that, and the question and answer period will be more of a brainstorming session among all of us. And so I'd invite you all to think about it over the next week and bring your wish list of what you'd like to see in a collaborative retreat like this. So please give it some thought, and I'll mention it again at the end. But just make a note of that and think about it. And because this is really your retreat, so let us know what you'd be interested in. Thanks very much. And with that, I'll kick it off with my question for both Delson and Forrest. How would you define a householder? What is a householder? Delson, maybe you can kick it off.
Yeah, householder. So this is very interesting. I like to talk a lot about the ancient Indian ways of life because there's so much great wisdom in how they kind of systemized everything. And if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it, right? That's the idea. So in ancient Indian thought, there were said to be, I think, four different stages of life. The first stage is brahmacharya. The second stage is grihastya. The third stage is the forest. Well, I forgot the Sanskrit. It's vanas, something like that. And then the fourth is sannyas. So the idea is that from the ages of around 8 to about, let's say, 25, somewhere around that time, you are a brahmacharya. And a brahmacharya is somebody who's a student, essentially, somebody who attends some kind of level of schooling to maybe vanaprasth. Thank you. That's the third stage. So a brahmacharya is somebody who is a student who essentially learns the Vedas or some level of ethics or something to do with their particular place in the world. If they're Kshatriya, if they're a warrior, they'll learn some martial arts. If they're a Brahmin, they will learn some of the Vedas. If they are a business person, entrepreneur, they'll learn, economics and so on and so forth. So trades or skill and things like that. And then there's something called the grihasti. So the grihasti is the householder. And that usually begins from the age of 25 onwards. It doesn't have to be exact. But essentially, that's the time when generally a person decides they want to build a family. So they may choose to get married and have children and build a family. And then the vanaprastha is the stage of life which happens from about 50 years onwards, or 55, something like that, where you kind of retired and now you are thinking about more spiritual pursuits. And then finally, sannyas, who is like a monk or monastic, somebody who goes into a life of leading leading a life of external renunciation and thinking more about spiritual ideals and meditating and so on. That's a very traditional way of looking at it. So the grihasti, coming back to the householder, they have certain duties to the existence of society. A householder is somebody who maintains their responsibility towards their spouse and towards their children, but they are sort of the glue that keeps society going because it's the sannyasis who go to the householders for alms. It's the people who seek welfare that go to the householder for alms or clothing or whatever it might be. And so the duty of a householder is to not only maintain their household through ethical means of work or trade, but also to express generosity for what they've received, um, and gratitude, of course, but generosity by giving what they have or extra of what they have to others. And so there's a certain kind of order in which this whole process works. So the householder is sort of the foundation for all of this. They support the brahmacharis who are essentially the kids, the people who are studying. They support their elders who are in the vanaprastha stage, who are now retired, and they support the sannyasis. So there's a great level of responsibility given to the householders.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, great context. And Forrest, how would you define a householder?
I thought that was perfect. So, yes, exactly. And this was a core teaching of Lahir Mashaya, where he would not give out the Kriya unless you were a householder. So the story, you can look it up on a Raya mission. It's still there. The Panchanan Bhattacharya Ji was a sannyas. So he had already renounced everything, and he came to Lahiri Baba. He was Panchanan was practicing a lot of tantric techniques, and afterwards he said that he had come into a number of negative results because of that. So it was not working correctly, and he was running into the problems that Lahiri Mashai was talking about when later he wrote his students. He said, you have to do the Om Japa. It's essential. You can't just throw that out. And it's very interesting that was a problem from the very beginning, that Lahir Mashai was correcting it from the very beginning. And then after he passed away, his family, very interestingly, published a number of his letters. And in those letters, it's written 3 times where he mentions the Om Japa. And 3 times. And I'm reading that. I'm like, oh my God, they're basically giving away the technique. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure it out. And it was that important. So anyway, Panchanan ran into those problems, came to Lahiri Mashai, heard about Lahiri Mashai. He's like, I would like to learn from you, sir. And Lahiri Baba says, go out, get yourself a job. In other words, renounce your renunciation and then come back and I'll give you the Kriya. So Panchanan immediately goes out to the market, buys some flowers, starts selling the flowers, and he comes back. He says, "Sir, I'm selling flowers in the market. I'm no longer sannyas. Please initiate me." And later he became married as well. So that's how important it was to Lahiri Mashaya. And so when you look at all of the, it's not celibacy itself. It's the forced celibacy. So you might go through a time where you're not interested. That's fine. That's not forced. But if you have a desire for chocolate ice cream and you force it down and force it down for too long, you'll suddenly find yourself in front of the fridge tearing. This happens when you're on a diet sometimes. The body. So interestingly, we were talking about diet, and one of the essential things that we need to do when we diet or when we fast is to supplement. And I was working with a naturopathic doctor. I actually hired somebody to draw us a picture for this, but he would always talk about, look, if your nutrient levels are like a tank, and if you let that tank get so low that in your diet or in your fast that the body's afraid of breakdown, then the subconscious will drive you. And so he said, it's not willpower that's causing you to be in front of your fridge in the middle of the night, tearing it open, looking for something to eat. It's not a lack of willpower. It's that your tank is so low, you don't have enough nutrients, and your body will just go nuts and force you to start eating something to try to get those nutrients back. And so in the same way, or a similar way, when you crave intimacy and you reject that and you force it down, this is not natural. And so it was Ban Mali Lahiri. So this is the great 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 grandson of Lahiri Mashaya. Ban Mali Lahiri, oh my God, he said it so beautifully. The spring pushed down will push back twice as hard. I mean, that's so simple. I mean, a child can understand that, right? And yet we get confused about celibacy. And that forced celibacy is a major problem. And you can read in the, so we look around, but I'm sorry, I'm like dividing my brain here. You can read in the Purana Purusha, which that was Ashok Chatterjee, and he had complete access to all of the diaries of Lahiri Mashaya. And in that, he said it so frankly, I was kind of shocked. He's quoting Lahiri Mashaya, and he says, if you force celibacy, then the mind will rebel and you'll become a pervert. That forced celibacy will lead to perversion. And so, God, how many years ago was this when Lahiri Mashaya was establishing his teaching, and he decided it was for householders only, if you believe the Uriah mission? And so, how long ago was that? So it was a very long time ago. And now look at the world today, and we have in every forced celibacy institution a scandal. So whenever I see somebody preaching celibacy, I'm like, let's sit around and wait. And it's not a condemnation. It's just, this is a problem. And the answer was given by Lahiri Baba. He's like, just be a householder. He's like, it's so perfect. It's so perfect. You do your job. And he was working, by the way, for the British military. He was working for the railway, which was an institution of the British military. And so he's like, you do your job, you come home, you lock yourself away for a bit of time, and then you spend your time with your family. It was very clear to him. And his he said to get rid of your desire for sex through having children. And that's kind of funny to me, because you have one kid and you're like, okay, whew, wow, and then I only have one kid, but if you have more and you're like, oh my God, I've got to rein this in. This is enough. And so he's saying that, but it's very true. This is a very natural thing that happens once you have a kid. You're like, all right, I think I'm done. Because the responsibility is so big. It's a beautiful thing, but the responsibility is so big. You're kind of like, okay, let's that's enough. And so that was the advice of Lahiri Mashaya, just very practical, very straightforward. And when you Damascus is giving us a face here, and didn't you just have a little bundle of joy just recently? And so so Lahiri Mashaya, and it's just amazing that he was, I mean, how when he started saying some of these things, it was really going against the grain. And so he was that I don't know, insightful and unafraid to tell you exactly what he thought a few months ago. So Damascus is a brand new parent. That's the wonderful time where you stay up all night putting them back to sleep. That's beautiful. I love it. But you get to practice cute baby all day. So that cute baby meditation. So yeah, householder. It's really the very best path, because it allows you that freedom. And I lived as a monastic. So I mean, I've lived both lives. So I was a monastic for 5.5 years, and it took me, I went through a 2-year incubation process where they were keeping me on the, maybe we'll take you in, maybe we won't. So 2 years. So altogether, it was 7.5 years of a monastic life. And so I know both sides, and I can tell you without any hesitation that the householder life is much easier for the yogi. And well, everything's relative, right? So you got to figure out how you're going to live. You've got to do your job. You've got to balance your life. And so you just lock yourself away a little bit every day. That's it. Very simple.
Or
Yeah.
as I was just thinking when you said, one child. My mother wants me to have at least 4 children. I don't know how I'm going to survive that.
No, yeah, start with one and then see how you do, and just, grandma, we got one, okay? I couldn't do the 4, but I got one. Yeah, start with one, and then two is good. But
Yeah.
wow, yeah. Well, I was in Nicaragua at the time that I had my child, and it was really hot, and so she was up every single night and could a little bit uncomfortable, and then I installed an AC unit, but until then it was like, God, it was like a month of
Mm.
being uncomfortable, and just every night like this, and you do that once and you're like, okay, one is good, I like one. uh, what's this, about 3 in 14 months, boy and girl.
Oh, wow.
3 in 14 months, oh my God, a boy and twin girls, amazing. Wow, that's gorgeous. So we talked about the hero's journey. When you have 3 kids, that's a hero's journey right there.
Seriously, seriously. Well, I had lunch today with a mutual friend of mine in Delson's, and we got a young son. I guess he's a year and 2 or 3 months now. And this is, someone who's a serious meditator who teaches meditation for his profession and coaches and so on. And he was saying, we were talking about practice, and he was saying, all my practice is like this. He's just like, that my son is my practice, and my relationship, the family, like they're actually bringing lots of new practices into their marriage, which is 10 years old. And, like eye gazing and, doing stretching together and a whole bunch of things just to bring in because you get so busy that you just don't see the other person. Right. And so that's something I'm curious about is, and yeah, I wonder, of course, if you just say a little more about, uh, you know, especially with a child, then the intimacy kind of goes out the window in certain ways, but you're now a family unit. And so that's even closer perhaps. But
Yeah.
what about the unique challenges of being a householder, and trying to maintain a meditation practice, trying to actually make progress in that context where we feel like it's easy to be calm and perfect on the mountaintop, but when you come down into the city and like if you want to know if you're awake, and spend a week with your family, they say, right? So
That's right.
It's so true.
yeah.
So true. That's gorgeous. Yeah, absolutely. So somebody, Alexander, I don't know if Alexander is here, and I think it was Alexander. I can't remember. Somebody sent me a video about this mountain climber, and so he was doing. I think he had the most free climbs in the world, like ever, where you're just climbing without a rope. It's just you, some sand, some powder, and free climbing up the mountain, and which is extremely dangerous. I'm not recommending this at all. I'm very stay home, stay safe kind of person, relatively speaking. I'm very adventurous when it comes to meditation, but you figure it out, and then you don't have to be so adventurous. And then, but he's doing all these free climbs, and they checked his brain, and his right amygdala, which that's your fear, that's your sense of doom, and it was shrunk. It was the smallest right amygdala they'd ever seen. And that's because he had this passion, and he just faced fear, and then faced fear, and then faced fear until he didn't care, and he could just climb, do all these free climbs, risking his life. All those free climbs, you can be a very good climber, but it's only one slip, one mistake, and then that's it. That's the that's the last of the story. And he's doing it without a safety line. So just amazing. But that's the facing of fear. So when you're a householder and you're having a hard time and you're having to face it, you have the potential to do the same thing where you overcome your fear. And even if you're in that moment, not perfect, you don't overcome it, you don't overcome the problem, you don't overcome the emotional issues. You now have, take notes. Okay, this issue and this issue and this issue, and then work on yourself. Find a way to work on that. Where if you're sitting in a cave, you don't get to do that. And so those subconscious ghosts don't come up for you to face as often. And so in the householder life, you've got this young, so talking about a significant other and intimacy, it was Young who said you marry your subconscious and then you project all of your unresolved issues out onto them. And so as you continue to work on yourself, you do the Om Japa, I like Huna, I like timeline therapy as well. As you continue to do that, and as you also, there's higher self therapy. So as you go deep, that is also transforming you. So like Delson brought up having a near death experience and the transformation that creates, that's a form of higher self therapy where you've gone up and then you come back down and you're like, oh, forget all this. This is nonsense. You just reject it because you've seen something that is so much bigger, right? And so that's that higher self therapy. So all of that comes together. So yeah, having somebody to project all your stuff out, and you just keep cleaning it out, and it gets better, it gets easier. Hopefully you start with a little bit of sanity and you just progress from there.
Great. Yeah. Delson, any thoughts on that issue of challenges to meditation in the householder life?
Yeah, that's a good question because I am not yet technically a householder insofar as having a family of my own, but I maintain a family in terms of taking care of my mother and my sister. And one of the things that I've noticed is, I, from a very young age, was of the bent of being more monastic or more sannyasi. Like since I was introduced to Vedanta and Sankhya and all of these things in Rishikesh and Uttarakashi, and was learning from yogis who were sannyasis or monastics. I always thought that that's probably what I would do at some point. I do recall a conversation I had with one sannyasi, which was interesting. And I told him, and I was just about 16 or 17, and I told him, I maybe want to be a sannyasi. And he said, well, think about it. Go through life first. You're only 16, you're only 17. Just see what life has to offer you. And he explained to me that he had basically done his PhD. He'd done all the academic stuff. He'd had a wife, he'd had a kid, he had kids. And then he finally, you know, finished his responsibilities as a father by raising his kids, taking them through school, and then seeing them off into the world. And then decided, okay, he wants to become a sannyasi. So I didn't really put much thought into it. And so I was always somebody who was of the bent of like, okay, no, I feel like I want to just at least be in the forest or in the cave. And I've done that a lot in my life. I've retreated into a cave and meditated there for months at a time. During the time of the pandemic, that's something that I was doing. And I think that's one reason why I haven't really maintained a lot of personal um, relationships with someone significant, a significant other, too much. But now I have a different view on it based on my experience with meditation and my experience with sort of the societal aspects of meditation. And what I mean by that is, so I recently did an interview, like just yesterday, with Daniel Ingram. For those of you who know Daniel Ingram, and on the Guru Viking show, and that'll come out at some point. But in there, we were talking about Daniel, who's a very advanced meditator, and we were talking about how some of the conditions for somebody who's very advanced and perhaps awakened and so on in certain traditions, like in Theravadan ideas, that means that once you attain a certain level of advancement, now it's time for you to become a monk. And there's this sort of myth behind it where if you don't become a monk in 7 days, you will go up in flames, something like that. And we were joking around about that. And Daniel said that even the hardcore Theravadan Orthodox monks know that that's like a late addition into the texts, and they don't take that seriously. It's apocryphal, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of why that would be the case. So my responsibilities right now kind of are limited to taking care of my mother and my sister, especially after my father passed away. One of the things he told me before he passed away, actually a couple of weeks, maybe 10 days before he passed away, I remember he was like in the living room with me, and he said, if something happens to me, I want you to promise me that you'll take care of your mother and your sister. And I said, yeah, but nothing's going to happen to you. Everything's going to be fine. It's okay. He's like, no, no, no. I want you to promise me. And I said, yes, I promise you. And I think since that time, he felt so much relief in that he was starting to unravel his bodily conditions. And he was like kind of at peace with wanting to go. So I hold my responsibility to my mother and my sister very sacred because of that. And I try to make sure that I can uphold that promise as much as I can. Sometimes to my own detriment, because my mother will always say, like, yeah, I know you made that promise, but you're doing everything you can. There's nothing for you to like worry about. If everything's being taken care of, just relax. But I have that kind of situation. Now, in terms of me having a family of my own, I am definitely contemplating it. And I have someone that I'm seeing currently in my life, and we'll see where that goes and what happens. And let's see. Let's see. I mean, maybe in a couple of years, you'll see me married and having a kid or four. Who knows? We'll see what happens. And then I'll get back to you on the challenges after that.
I love it. The what is it? The Vedic tradition. What do you call it when you're a Brahmin? The Brahmin tradition, right? It's
Yes.
it's usually passed down from one family to the next, right? So each Brahmin family will have a set of techniques, and those differ from family to family, but they will pass them down through a family. And it's very important as you pass that down that you preserve the tradition, right? And you see this in a lot of shamanic traditions. So when you go to, if you look up Huna, and those are family systems. And so one family would have a set of shamanic techniques that they would pass down primarily through their own family. So if they had students outside of that and they could pass it down as well, that was okay. But primarily it was through the family structure that they were passing down technology, this this yogic like technology. And so Tad James, when I was studying with Tad James, he talked about he was collecting Huna secrets, and he was studying with one kahuna, and then he would study with another kahuna in Hawaii. And then he started writing about Huna. He started giving classes, And people would come to him and give him an entire package of a lineage. And one of those was published in his books. And then another one was given to him, which was like an alphabet of energy. So it was all these energy symbols and the mantra, the Huna language mantra that went with each symbol and the meaning of each. And so it's really beautiful to look at that and then look at the Brahmin tradition and maybe understand a little bit more about this idea. I mean, can you think about it? Imagine having a lineage and then being able to pass it down to your child and then just continuing that generation by generation, so far as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose that's what the Lahiri family does, isn't it? I mean, that it's gone down from father to son to grandson to great grandson. It continues on.
That's right. That's right.
Cool. Apart from going up in flames, uh, I think a lot of people are wondering, but can I really progress in the householder life? Like, is it possible for householders to awaken as easily as monks? And can you go as deep in, these practices as monks could who have the ideal conditions and so on? So I'm curious about that. Delson, I wonder if you'd talk to that a bit.
Yeah. I think, when the Buddha set up the monastic system, if we were to call it that, we have to also look at the context behind where he was coming from. Uh, at that time, we only had, let's say, the Vedic ideals of this idea of the shared knowledge from father to son and so on and so forth. And there were a lot of different philosophers and different pundits, as they call them, teachers and wise sages who would discuss the Vedas and the Upanishads and so on, and think about what is the self, what is consciousness, and so on. And the Buddha's story is very interesting because he lived in a time where we had other wanderers coming in, not only in terms of the sannyasis of the Hindu tradition, but also what they called Shramana tradition. So that's like what's also known in Pali as Samaneras or Samanas, is like wanderers, people who are wandering into the forest for knowledge. And the traditional story goes is, he was kept in in this sort of very idyllic space where no death was shown to him, no old age was ever shown to him, no sickness, and so on. Like his father had received this astrological reading where it said he could be one of two things. He would either be a great emperor or he would be a sage, a great sage. And a father being a father, he wanted to protect his son and he wanted to make sure that he had the best of everything. And in that context, being a king, being an emperor, he wanted his son to do the same thing. Actually, his father was not an emperor, he was a king. There's a difference there. But in any case, um, so Siddhartha, as his name was protected heavily from, he was sheltered. He had a very sheltered life. And the traditional story goes that he essentially saw sickness in the form of a sick person. He saw old age in the form of an old person, an aged person, and he saw death in terms of a funeral pyre. But the thing that inspired him to go out and seek something was seeing a wanderer. He was with his charioteer, and he saw a man meditating under a tree, and he had such a look of peace on his face. And he asked him, who is that man? And he said, that man is a samana. He's a wanderer. He's gone forth, as they say, from the home life to the homeless life in pursuit of the liberation from samsara. And this is what inspired him to then go out himself. So he cut his hair and he left the traditional story goes is that he left the kingdom in the dead of night and all of this. But the reality actually, and in accordance with the Pali Canon, is He actually discussed it with his parents, with his father. He discussed it with his wife. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of crying. There was a lot of this and that. And finally, they relented. And he also said that I'll come back. If I find the truth, I'll come back to teach it all to you. And he left with his parents' permission to go out into the forest and become a wanderer. And then he met with the Jain ascetics and so on. And then he came to his own understanding of life and his own understanding through wisdom and enlightenment. And he started the monastic order because of the context in which he found his enlightenment. And I think if you think about it that way, that's the reason why the monastic order was started from a Buddhist perspective, which is he called the home life crowded and dusty, which is to say that there's a lot of responsibilities, there's a lot of things that get in the way. And I think given his context, given his life, where he lived a very sheltered life, and then going out in being exposed to sudden death and old age, it was such a shock to his system. He thought that the only escape is probably living a life of a wanderer in the forest, where that person who has peace is worth it. And so I will do the same. Maybe it would have been different if the context was different. Maybe if his father inoculated him and said, okay, see, this is what death is. This is what old age is. This is what suffering is. This is what we all have to go through. Maybe through his, knowledge of the Vedas and through his understanding of meditation, because he was somebody who was already a very astute meditator and philosopher in his own way, by the learnings of the Vedas and by, the fact that he was a very meditative person in general. It could have been a different thing altogether. And I think as time progressed and as tradition grew, the monastic order became the ultimate. And so to become a bhikkhu, as they say in Pali, to become a monk was of the highest esteem. It still is in places like Thailand and Sri Lanka and Burma, where these Theravadan communities are very strong. There's a big population of Theravadan Buddhists. Giving all that context, that's one thing. And so there might be some benefit from that perspective. However, I also see the danger, what Forrest was talking about earlier, about the fact that, when we go into forced celibacy, or when we go into forced anything, and we decide that's how we're going to live our lives, we're going to be meeting with a lot of different troubles. We're going to be meeting with a lot of suppression and repression. I don't want to get too much into it, but I will say, suffice it to say, when I was in Cambodia, I did hear of and I did see what it was like for monastics in Cambodia. And there had been a lot of reports of different kinds of scandals that were happening because of the suppression and because of the repression. And just because there is a Vinaya, which is the code of conduct of how monastics should behave, I didn't see a lot of monastics behaving altogether, in accordance with that. Now, that's just my experience. I'm sure, and I know of some great monks who are very dear friends of mine who've embraced that path, but they're also very open about their practice and they're very open about what it is. They're not like shutting off the ugliness of a monastic life either. They're very much open about those things. And so I think, there's an idealization that comes up with, if I become a monk and if I wander into the forest and I'll experience nirvana and I'll be, completely liberated and all of that. No, 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 no. That is all a process of possible self-hypnosis. That's a process of where you feel like now I'm free. But it really boils down to that particular statement. Spend a week with your family and you'll know how enlightened you are. There's a real truth in that. Coming back into the worldly life and seeing how your reactions and responses are to people in society, and how well can you forgive others? How well can you generate compassion for others? How well can you take stock of the blame for when you are to be blamed? How well can you withstand criticism? How well can you withstand praise? How well can you do all these kinds of things? So I have a bit of a bias because I've never been a monastic, but I've had that sort of training as I was in my younger age. But I'm a bit biased by saying that I think it's more challenging to be a householder than it is to be a monastic. And for that reason, it's more valuable in terms of experience to be enlightened and awakened in a householder life rather than just in a sannyasi or renunciant's life.
Beautiful, thank you. We've come up to an hour, I think now, so or coming up to the hour rather. So but I have a question about creativity. Now, I've seen so many Buddhist teachers and other spiritual teachers in the last several decades, sort of breaking out and doing all kinds of very creative things with their sort of awakenings. Uh, and so for both of you, and something that perhaps in a monastic context would be more limited and wouldn't be available to monastics. So I'm curious about both your journeys and your experiences with that sort of freedom, spiritual freedom, and then how that would translate into creativity and how they inform each other actually, because this creativity helped to feed the spiritual life, and does the spiritual life help to feed creativity? Um, and I guess because well, I think both of you have been involved in creative writing, among other things, in your careers. So maybe I'll jump over to Forrest and ask you first about that. What are your thoughts on creativity and spirituality as a householder?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The I want to share a little story first. I was thinking when Delson was talking. So I was in a house with five other guys. It was the Gardner house, and so we were working for the the church, the ashram where we were trying to get in. And one of the guys was he was really intense, and he came he came out of his room one day, and he goes, I just had the most amazing dream. And he he said this yogini had come to him in his dream, and she was laughing at him, and he was planning to be a monastic. He had difficulties with himself, and he just thought that he was going to go into monastic life, and that was going to solve all of his problems. And she was laughing at him, pointing her finger at him, and saying, I know what you're thinking. and he came out, and as he related the story, the spirit that he was conveying was, wherever you go, there you are, right? And so you think you're going to go into a monastic setting and that's going to solve your problems, but all of those people, wherever you go, there you are, and they're bringing all of their stuff. So there's political problems in an ashram, which I saw repeatedly. There's grumpiness, there's emotional problems, there's every problem under the sun. So the beautiful thing about a householder life is that you're in control of yourself. So that was the most difficult thing about being in an ashram, is that my life was not my own and somebody could come and tell me what to do. And when you're a householder, you have so much control over yourself, over your time, over what you're doing, over how you work out your relationship, over everything in your life. Every corner of your life, you have supreme control. And so you get to organize it. So everything that you're looking for potentially inside of an ashram, you can create it, and you can have your own weekend retreats that you can set up for yourself. You have 3 days off. I mean, that's an amazing retreat potentially. And I've done videos about this, how to do your own home retreat. It's so easy because you have the control. And so long as you look to yourself and you're a self-starter, and you can make a few notes and write things down and try it out for yourself. And it's the techniques and the learnings and the understandings which are going to give you the skills to get what you want. It's not a place, It's not an ashram that's going to give you what you want. It's the work that you do with the techniques, with the understandings that gets you the results. And so I just want to say that first. But creativity, yeah, when you're going inside. So the first part of the journey is that you're getting into your subconscious. So whatever form of meditation that you're using, you're going to get into your subconscious a little bit. And so you start out with, maybe I can show you guys. You start out with the beta brainwave, okay? And this is where normal people are. So when you're a meditator, you're no longer a normal person. You've kind of left that behind. And so you're going to find if now and then that you just can't relate to other people. And that's because they are literally living on the, and I don't mean this in a derogatory, I'm not putting anybody down, in fact, because we've all been there. So why would I put anybody down when we've all been there? So that's not my meaning at all. But this is, so if you look at the top here, at the very top, that's the beta brainwave. And you see how everything's missing down below? It's just this little pencil-like thing. That's because the alpha, the theta, and the delta are not there. So you talk to somebody and they can't get in touch with their own feelings. They can't tell you how they're feeling right now easily. That's because they're stuck in stress and they're stuck in the beta brainwave and they cannot access the subconscious. And so as you get to know yourself, you're going to get into what Anna Wise would call the awakened mind. And that means that your subconscious starts to come online. So this is beta at the top, then that big line, that's the alpha. Then down below is the theta, and then the delta. So alpha is when you get a little sleepy. There's lots of sleepiness there. This is a trance state. Then the theta is when you have a dream. That's also awakening. And so down at the very bottom is the delta, and the delta is when you feel somebody sneaking up on you and your hackles rise, right? You get goosebumps, you know somebody's sneaking up on you. That's the delta brainwave that allows that deep instinctual intuition to hit you. And so that's the awakened mind right there. And so that's pure creativity. Now, it's the beginning of that. So as you hang out with your subconscious, you have to clean yourself. You will automatically begin to clean yourself because you'll see things that you don't like and you'll be like, I've got to do something about this. And maybe it takes you a long time, maybe it takes you a short time, maybe you have Om Japa in the chakras and that's helping you. And so you begin to integrate with your subconscious. And then your brainwaves start to coalesce. They start to integrate. And eventually that awakened mind, you could see it was kind of jutting out all over the place. It eventually becomes the evolved mind. Now, this is using the terminology of Anna Wise, and I like the way that they talk about it. I don't recommend getting the mind mirror because it's $1,000 and it won't do you better than HRV resonance, okay? In my opinion. Now, along the way to that so this is full on integration with your subconscious, okay? But before that, you'll hit this state where you're not quite integrated. Kind of looks like a diamond. And these are, I'm sorry, this is approximations, but the actual brainwaves will be expressed like something like this, right? Oh, and so this is they call this the creative mind. And so that's the beginning of integration, or maybe you hit this state where you're fully integrated with the subconscious. And at that point, there is nothing that you cannot do creatively. There's nothing you can't do. And that's kind of amazing. And then you start to open up to the superconscious mind. So this is the awakened mind, and so that means this is an amazing state. So has the beta brainwave is subdued, okay, in the middle. The subconscious is online. And this is the gamma. So the gamma has opened up and you're aware that there's something more than you. And so this is not a profound state, but it's an amazing state. By our stretch, this is normal. When you have a download state, this is what is going on, like this state or a deeper state. And so that's supremely creative. And so that's when your higher self, not just your subconscious. So your subconscious, so you've got you, the conscious mind, you've got your subconscious, and that means all your information is accessed in an easy, creative way. But when that gamma hits you at the same time, that means that the superconscious mind is now feeding you ideas and information as well. And so now you get to pick and choose what you do with that. You don't, sometimes people are like, oh my God, God tells me something, I have to do it immediately. And no, it's a conversation. It's a conversation between you and the superconscious mind. And so I've often come back and say, okay, great. Now, how do I do that? Okay, well, that's fine. That's fine. Just tell me how I get this ball rolling. Okay. Let's work, okay, I'm going to work on this. We're going to work out how this works. And so think of it more like a conversation between you and the higher self. But yeah, creativity. Oh my God. So you start to integrate. So all of this is integration. Mm. And as you start that integration, first with the subconscious and then with the superconscious, as you begin that very, very, very long lifetime process of integration, then your creativity will suddenly go off the hook. And it'll start probably with something that you're good at. And it will just start leaking into your life automatically. And as you keep going, it just goes off the hook. So, and then the inspiration that hits you. So there's something about, this is cool. So there's something about the right brain. When you touch it, it's like gold. So the gold at the end of the rainbow, it is the right brain. And when you touch it, you touch it enough, like a few times, automatically you will go, oh my God, I have to share this. So you look at the history of every tradition, every inspired teacher, and they all are coming from that place. They touched the right brain and immediately it became enough. Oh my God, I have to share this. And when that hits you enough, you don't even have a choice. So I wrote my first book because I had to. It was bursting inside of me. I had to. It was and it was agonizing because I wasn't sure if I was good enough, right? So I had this limiting idea about myself and teachers, and I thought maybe I'm not good enough, right? And I agonized about that for a very long time. So I had to that was all my cleaning up process. I had to clean all that up and let all of that go and just, okay, roll the dice. Here we go. Let's see, for this is for those who have ears. Whoever needs to hear this, they will hear it. And it's not my place to figure that out. So I was trying to figure all that out, and that's a waste. That's not my job. My job is to what I have to say it. And so, yeah, but yeah, that's the right brain. So the right brain, when you touch it, you will feel that it's like you want to. So you will get this feeling when you touch deep silence, which is the right brain. When you touch deep inspiration, like, oh my God, I got to run out in the street and tell everyone. And you really want to tell everybody, which of course you can't, right? This is Plato and the cave. You go out, you tell somebody, they're like, what? I don't know. Are you kidding? It's dark. It's dark everywhere. What are you talking about? And you're like, no, there's light. There's light. There's joy. There's bliss. There's love. There's all these things. And they're like, oh man, this guy is so delusional. And you're like, no, it's real. I was there. And they're like, no, you're dreaming. You're hallucinating. No. And so, it's very hard. So all of you, are gathered here because you've touched that, it's real. And so you're living a different life. And that's not to condemn anybody or put them down. It's simply, isn't that fascinating? That the beta brainwave, by definition, is living on the surface of life. They don't even have access to their subconscious. And as you continue to clean yourself out, it's just going to open up an amazing, gorgeous world to you. And it's not one, it's two. There's one in the subconscious, and then there's one in the superconscious mind. It's just waiting for you.
So interesting. I was, oh, sorry. Yeah. There was something in
Oh,
the
I was
chat.
just going to say, somebody just commented about, I did this video about the thin place. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. The thin place is it's a little video I did, but that's the beta brainwave. That is the thin place.
Cool. Yeah, I guess part of what motivated this question for me was living in Japan. You see like the great old Zen masters and so on, that they would often express their awakening through different arts, right? And so you were showing us, for us just before we came on, your scroll. And yeah, and maybe we could take a look. And yeah, and so it's an ink painting. And so the ink paintings, what's interesting about them is that they use negative space. I mean, they really define the use of negative space in the way that they'll just have a few brushstrokes that could be a bird or could be a landscape or something. And that really seems to be coming out of the right brain. That the negative space, there's nothing there, it's silence, right? But that defines it's just those few lines. That's what makes it beautiful. It's a negative space, right? So yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I wonder, Delson, if you would talk about creativity and what it means to you in terms of your practice.
Oh yeah. So, anyone who knows me personally knows that I can be very prolific in my writing. Like it could be articles, it could be books, it could be anything. And John and I have had so many discussions about so many different ideas. And I'll ping John. I'll be like, John, you got to hear this. Like we got to talk about this. Can you get on a Zoom right now? And usually we do. And then I talk about it, and we get so excited, and we're talking for 2 hours. And it's like, okay, now we have a whole outline for a book, and now it's just there in the archives. Whenever I'm ready to write the book, it's going to be out there. Whatever book it is. So there's always this like inspiration that comes up, and it can come up out of nowhere because you're so used to being in that space as you continue to practice, as you continue to um to basically condition, for lack of a better word, the mind to be in that space more often than not. And I think from my experience as a writer throughout my life, when I first started out, a lot of my writings, interestingly enough, in hindsight, have been somewhat, um, I wouldn't use the word prophetic, but somewhat like looking into the future. Because there was, for example, I won't get too much into it, but I once wrote a screenplay about a time where there's a pandemic in early 2020. And there's a lot of things that happen with China and the government and this and that. And that script is out there somewhere. I don't think it's ever going to be released now because we've lived it, so there's no need to do that. But there's few writings like that that I've done in my life as a ghostwriter or as a screenwriter or as a novelist, where there have been things that have happened in the real world that are just like a testament to what I recall writing about. And it's not saying, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it's more like as if I was tapping into the ether of like what is possible in the world. And you sometimes get ideas which you'll notice are like somebody else also had that same idea around that same time. And it's just a matter of how you decide to execute it. And that execution comes not only from inspiration, but your own efforts that are inspired by that initial idea. And you make it your own based on your particular um, skills and artistic skills or literary skills or poetic skills or whatever it might be. And I'm always fascinated by this, idea that, when we think about You think of like I really love, by the way, what Forrest was showing about the beta, the alpha band, and the delta and the gamma, the theta and the gamma. I remember, I don't know if you guys ever done binaural beats, just to add to this, but I was really into binaural beats for quite some time, this holosync and hemisync kind of stuff. And I don't know how much credence to it is. So maybe it could just be my placebo effect or just me having like, oh, I had an experience. But I remember a couple of times where I went through like a delta binaural beat brainwave thing. And I remember that's sort of like what Forrest was describing. It's like, oh, this is a little weird. Like I don't know if I really want to be in this state. And I also remember once doing this when I was, okay, of all places, this was just before the pandemic. I was in the Maldives. And I was in the Maldives because I was doing flight training. Um, and this was a couple of days before I was starting to go with my flight training. And I decided to do a really deep meditation. And then I took some caffeine and like in the form of black tea. And then I put on gamma wave binaural beats. And I was cruising. Like I was just like, I didn't have to be in the air, literally in an airplane. I was already out there. Like there was like, it was just like I was no longer in my body. And it was like I was tapping into something even greater. So I think with meditation in general, when we start to learn how to quiet that part of the mind that is always trying to analyze and rationalize and process, and we are patient enough to just be there in the stillness, something comes up. It's an inkling of an idea, or it's some kind of like word or an image. And as Forrest was saying, we might not have to immediately grasp at it. We could just discuss it. We could say, okay, where is this taking me? What? Ask it questions. That's the beautiful thing about the intuition. It can be prompted by questions. Okay, where are you taking me with this? What do I do next? Where do I go with this? And don't try to answer for the intuition. Just remain there and wait, and an answer will come to you. And now you're starting to have a conversation with the higher self or God or whatever you want to call it. And that's where the beauty comes, all of the good stuff that comes. And I think this was a process that was used by many of the inspired artists and musicians of the last, 400 years or so. They like Beethoven, for example, one of my most favorite composers. You had someone like Bach who was very mathematical in his structure of music. He was very talented in creating these, very intricate pieces. You had the genius of Mozart, who was very prolific and from a very young age, a prodigy. But you had someone like Beethoven, who went through so much tragedy in his life. He lost his hearing. He was never married, never had a chance to have kids of his own. He contemplated suicide. But from all that pain, from all that suffering, he decided, listen to God, listen to the higher self. He was inspired by God to create some of the most beautiful symphonies and sonatas and all of these amazing pieces. And he's like the most grumpy, belligerent person. And yet this beautiful music comes out of him. That's not coming from his rational mind. It's coming from his inspired God state, if you would.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd love to pursue this conversation, but we have a growing queue of questions here, so maybe we can move over to the questions now. And I'll start with Shadi, and please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Forrest, Delson. Just to follow up on that story about inspiration, Delson, funny story I heard many years ago. Harry Mancini, middle of the night, and he's getting an inspiration for a new piece. And he doesn't want to get up, and he doesn't want to get up, and he doesn't want to get up. And then he finally says, if I don't get up, God's going to send this to Quincy Jones. So gets up and actually, writes it before God sends it to somebody else. So I just love that story about inspiration.
That's
So
great.
my so my question about holosync, I get like the worst headache when I use that kind of I guess tool. And I'm just wondering what both of your thoughts are on, does using these outside methods that are human kind of created, right?
Right.
Does that actually interfere with your meditative process or meditative, progress?
It could. So you definitely want so when you're listening to something and it says this is really good and you should do it, and then you try it and your instant take on it is no, this is not for me. Listen to that, because it's more than likely very, very correct. You are probably very correct. So there are a lot of people that are into binaural beats, and they want to, maybe they buy a program or they just copy something and they throw it together and they throw it out in the world. It might not be correct for you. And even so, even if you think this is a great person, and they could be very sincere, could be coming from a good place, and yet they don't know what they're doing, and it can cause you problems. So you want to make sure that you're listening to something and you're actually enjoying it. And they might mix it up halfway through, so you got to make sure that you enjoy it all the way through. And if there's a part of it that you don't like, then you should stop listening to it and use something else, hopefully something a little more simple. But the idea for a lot of these is they're balancing the brain waves. And so it's causing an instant trance because they're hitting you from both sides. And I've got a video about how you can kind of do this somatically through yourself. And you feel, so you can try this out if you like. But this is kind of gives you an idea of what the beat, you have one beat on one side, you have one beat on the other side, and you're hearing different beats, right? And it's causing this synchronization of the brain. And so maybe you can feel a little bit of that if we try this out. So try to feel your whole body, just feel the whole thing. And then feel the side which feels lighter, more upbeat, more joyful, whichever side that is. Take that feeling, and then I want you to push it over to the other side with a ha breath. So I'm going to take that feeling. So I feel, what do I feel? I feel just a okay, so I feel a little bit of bliss on this side, and I'm going to push that to the other side with a ha breath. So I'm just going to very kindly push it to the other side. This is your body. It just loves to share. So just push it over. And then how do you feel? Oh, I feel a little different. That's cool. Now I'll do it again. Feel again. Which side is the lighter side, the more joyful side? Feel that feeling, and then push it again to the other side. And if you keep doing this just a little bit, if you practice this a little bit, you will start to feel a little bit of joy or a little bit of bliss or a little bit of upliftment. And it's because of the way your caudate nucleus works. And so you're sharing it of all the parts in your brain, everything is kind of divided in the brain. Everything has two sides to it. And of all those pieces, the caudate nucleus needs to talk the most together. So they really want to integrate. And that's because it feels your left foot go out and feel the ground. And then it has to share that with the right foot so that you can know what's coming. And so you're sharing information with your caudate nucleus all day. And when that information zooms back and forth across the body, like we just did, it starts to create a little bit of bliss. And it very wonderfully wipes out some of the projections which are inside of the body. So it's really kind of an amazing little technique. And some of that synchronization is taking place with the different sounds inside of either ear. So you're doing that so that one ear hears one thing, it wants to share it with the other side, and so there's this sharing which is going on, which causes a heightened state. So it's a you're also balancing there's this possibility that you're balancing the left amygdala and the right hippocampus at the same time. So there's a lot of sharing going on. So it can be really good, but you want to make sure that you actually like it. And then once you find somebody that starts making things that you like, you can keep listening to what they have.
Awesome, thank you. I have noticed lately that when I turn my head, sometimes I get a wah 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 that happens in my ears, or in my brain or somewhere. I don't know what that's about. It just started like a few weeks ago, and I don't know if you had any comments or whether I should get an X-ray. I don't know.
No, a lot of yogis will start to hear the nada. So the nada sounds they are described like a bumblebee, and then a flute, and then a harp, and then a gong, and then rushing water, which turns into the sound of Om. So the tone, though, is usually a consistent tone. But when you start listening internally, there's lots of different sounds which are possible. So along with your heartbeat and along with, I've had yogis tell me they've heard really strange sounds that lasted for a little time and then it went away. So that's a possibility.
All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, then Quilly is next.
Hi, guys. So I identify as a female, and I'm fortunate enough to live in a time where all gender identities are finding ways to be acknowledged. I'm not saying that it's perfect yet. There's still shame and everything, but in your discussions around the householders, there was only one gender being discussed. And I think I like when I was practicing in Sayadaw U Pandita's monastery, he flat out told me, well, not this time around, because of my female body. And like when I'm hearing you talk about the householder life and after children and all of that, I mean, there's two adults in that family unit. Both people could want to be awake, to be monastics, to be. I'm just wondering why that, because I've heard you both be pretty inclusive, why you're not speaking to that.
Could I just say that I listened to this talk and I didn't hear any specificity about gender. There wasn't like men. I mean, everything that was said sounded to me like it could apply just as well to women. Is that not true?
I didn't hear anybody say only men, but listening from the female body, there wasn't like a resonance and an inclusive feeling that I had. And so I was curious about what is your attitude? And particularly Delson, I think, because I've heard him I know him better, and I've heard him be more inclusive gender-wise, and the Theravada tradition is pretty much male body oriented.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've heard me, Quilly, talk about like how in the monastic communities, there's been, even within the Pali Canon, there's been a sort of hierarchy. Yeah. And where to that point, what you were talking about, where you who was that you said? In Burma, was it? Or the Burmese?
Sayadaw U Pandita is where I
U
stay.
Pandita. Yeah, U Pandita. So, I mean, even in the Pali Canon, it talks about how only a man can be a Buddha. And so it's like, why? And it's because of certain kinds of cultural projections about, he needs to have a penis and he needs to be this and he needs to be that and all of this other stuff. And there's a lot of like hierarchy about like how, because the bhikkhunis, that is to say the female monastics, joined the order, because of that somehow they corrupted the monastic system, and therefore the sasana will only exist for 500 years or whatever it is. So even in terms of the householder life, I'll tell you, there are some great examples. And now Steve, he mentioned in the chat about Damadina, who was a female arhat and so on. But even in like the Vedic ideas and the yogic ideas, there's some great rishikas, they call them. Rishis are the male version of the seers who experience some wonderful insights. But there's some very powerful rishikas who, by the way, are also householders. So, I think it's very cultural based, where the expectation is that it's the man who's like the breadwinner, and then the woman is the one who takes care of the household or whatever it is. But I think if we look back into even the ancient texts, there is some great examples of people like Gargi and Lopamudra and Vak Ambrini, who, by the way, I was actually reading this Sanskrit text. I've been practicing it for myself. I've been learning it from a Sanskrit tutor, and it's called Devi Suktam. And it's a powerful set of mantras to the divine feminine. And she's the only householder yogini who speaks from that high state. Every other mantra in the Vedas is in either the second person or the third person of, Brahman is this and Nibbana is this and all of these things. But she's the only one who starts with Aham Rudre, meaning I am. In the Vedas, they were talking about probably 5,000-6,000 years ago. So there is some great examples of that. I guess it's because we're both males, Forrest and I, we might come from that perspective, but by no way means are we, discounting the power of the feminine. Like for me personally, I have a great respect, or I should even say devotion, to the divine feminine. Like in my own personal practice, we have the divine mother, we have the divine feminine aspect from Shakti, who is manifesting in so many different powerful forms, like Kali and Durga and Parvati and so on. I generally don't talk about it because it doesn't come up. But since you're bringing it up, I'm saying for my personal practice, it's a very powerful intuitive practice for me. Like when I do my intuitive practice, it's from that perspective of the divine feminine that I'm bringing in my intuitive experiences. So this could be for any person and for any gender. And to the point about the monastic community, I feel like, we might be bashing them here and there, but this is a very important point to mention as well. They have a concept of known as pandeyas, I think they're called in the Pali tradition. And they're basically they call them the third gender. Basically, they don't identify as male, and they don't identify as female. They're another kind of gender that they identify with, and they are laid to the wayside. Like they are not allowed to be monastics at all. So there's a lot of like cultural and political and societal pressure and projections in these communities that just seem very archaic.
Thank you. Yeah, and I certainly wasn't questioning that you think that female bodies can become enlightened, or beings with female bodies. But you're kind of at an interesting place because culturally, yeah, you got to take care of your mother and your sister for cultural reasons and promise reasons and like that. But you also were saying that this is handed down, grandfather, father, son. And so, like, what about the person that you decide to marry and have children with, then is that part of the negotiation now in the new world? You know, like, okay, well, what are you going to want to do after babies? And, you know,
Well,
who,
she and I have kind of talked about it, by the way. She's a powerful yogini in her own right. That's why I love her so much. She is a Vajra yogini, and we've talked about that. And we've talked about how we would raise our children together and what that would mean. And so, yeah, I think, and that's a discussion to have between individuals, whether it's male, 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 female, 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 or whatever. There's always, the divine masculine and divine feminine and so on. So, yeah, I mean, I've had that discussion. Yeah.
oh, that's great. I hope it turns out really well for all of us and you model yet another wonderful thing. And yeah, I appreciate your response, your kind response.
Thanks. Forrest, did you want to address anything there before we move on?
Sure. We're talking about something which is universal, which is in your spine. It's in the higher nervous system. So I showed you the brain waves. Those are all universal. We're talking about the chakras, which are all universal. Everybody's has a brain. So just being a human puts you in this amazing ability to access the infinite. And it's such an amazing opportunity that it's said that the gods and goddesses are actually jealous of humans, that we have this opportunity and they don't, because you could think that a good way to think of it is that the gods and the goddesses are part of God's brain and they are just doing what they do in this universe. And so their role is set. And you as a human, your role is infinite, that you have this ability to become one with the divine. So that's based on your nervous system, your chakras. It's not based on your genitalia at all. so it's completely universal.
Great,
It's down
thank
here
you.
in the manifest realms where it becomes relevant and how we present it, I think. You know, how we actually negotiate with our partners or with our non-partners, or, you know, that's.
Yes, and I think Delson said it perfectly. That's a conversation that you have to have.
Thanks. No, that's not the one I want.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Tony, it's you're up. And
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for both for this great conversation. I have a question, I guess, on the Buddhist Theravada part of it, and there are four stages of enlightenment there, and as you go through the stages, certain feathers drop out, and some of the Theravada monks or teachers talk about how to evolve or change the sexual energy to more divine energy. And they have this conception that if people get to anagami, the sexual desires drop, and going forward, that doesn't need it. And I agree that celibacy probably won't be a good approach, especially until a person reaches to maybe sakadagami or monogamy, that energy, they don't bother them. But I just wanted to ask what your views are on the two things they often mention. One is that how that energy can be transformed to a divine energy, or that helps, but also when people get to anagami, the sexual energy drops going forward after that stage.
Yeah. So I would say that it doesn't drop. And this is something I've had to go back on because of my own experience, but also from really looking at it from the perspective of, why should enlightenment have such an effect on our basic biological needs? If it actually destroys sexual energy, then it should also destroy our hunger and our thirst and any other simple biological responses and impulses. So I don't think that's what happens. Perhaps there's a less interest psychologically in sexual expression or sensual desire, possibly. But then again, I can say from my own experience, that's not the case. That's not the case. And I realize that everybody will have their own perspective on this, especially, let's say, the Orthodox traditionalists on this view. But I'm speaking from my experience and my path through that experience.
That's great to hear this perspective. I mean, for years, monks has been kind of like judging each other based on that, and I would say that's one of the things they often tell and ask, or it comes up in monasteries, etc. I mean, there is a certain Korean monks that the Taigi orders, they are allowed to actually get married and have family and go around, in contrary to other monks. But this has been for a long time that if somebody has got sexual desires, etc., they quickly judge them. Unfortunately, in those societies, that that person is not anagami, etc. But that's refreshing. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Bill, you are up.
Yeah. Hi, Delson. Delson, I have a couple of questions. But first, just to address the sexual part, I'm relieved to hear that it was one of the obstacles when I was first starting to meditate. I'm happily married, and that's a big part of our life. And I was concerned about whether this would become a problem. And so I'm glad to hear that. I think it's an obstacle, this idea that your sexual desire dies later on in your life. And so thank you. But I have two questions. First of all, I am confused about the role of Kundalini and Kriya Yoga. And I listened to a talk you gave, an interview with David Johnson, in which you seem to be saying that Kundalini didn't have a place. But I have been reading about Kriya Yoga, and so I'm just a little confused on that. Could you clarify that, please?
Sure. So I'm talking primarily from other iterations of practices that I've done where it was dealing directly with Kundalini. And those are some, let's say, practices rooted in certain yogic and tantric texts. And some of them are also iterations of what we would call alternatives to Kriya, or another kind or form of Kriya Yoga, because there have been so many different branches, or let's say lineages in that sense. And some of the lineages that I've been part of or have learned from, by the way, some of them are monastic lineages too, and therefore there's a lot of suppression and repression about sexual desire there as well. And they call it Kundalini. They talk about dealing directly with the Kundalini through waking it up from the Muladhara, from the root chakra, and so on. But my point is, when I spoke about it with my interview with David Johnson, and I still stand by this, is Kundalini practice is very much becomes so, I don't know if commercialized is the word, maybe it's McDonaldized, where it's just like, oh, I'm going to show you what Kundalini is all about, and just come to my 3-day workshop, and I'm going to raise your Kundalini. And it just creates so many like challenges for the practitioner. And, I don't know if you come across this word or term, Kundalini syndrome. Like, yeah. I had that for a long time. And so I'm talking from my own experience, where I was doing certain kinds of practices for many, many hours. We're talking 6, 7, 8, 10 hours of practice, and literally experienced like burnout through my spine, and it was just very bad. It took me a long time to recover from that. So when we talk about Kriya from this perspective, that especially how Forrest teaches, he talks about, and I'm putting words in Forrest's mouth so he can correct me if I'm mistaken here. But he talks about the roll up of consciousness, which some might interpret that as a Kundalini process of like it feels like there's a rise up through the chakras. But I don't think that might be the case. It might be just what he's describing, which is a roll up of consciousness.
Beautiful. The so it is Kundalini, but it's so we're take a look at the koshas, and when you start to understand that we're coming out of, so the koshas are very simple. Koshas just say you're one of those Russian nesting dolls, and the real you is down at the core. And so we're living on the surface of our lives, and we think that we're this, nesting doll. And then oh my God, I'm not actually this physical thing. I'm actually this energetic thing. And that's where the Kundalini gets hung up, because they get hung up on the energy. And like Delson was talking, they're doing tons and tons and tons of repetitive exercises so they can feel this energy all of the time. And it does lead to a lot of experience, but it doesn't give the deep realization necessarily. So often you'll fall into a deep state. So that's great, but it's not guaranteed because they're so hung up on the Kundalini energetic side of things. So then we go one nesting doll inside, we come into more of the realm of the feeling. So we might feel, the loving kindness or the compassion or the joy or the equanimity or the bliss. And now we're getting closer to the truth. Actually, before that, so along the way, we start to figure out that the consciousness is more important than the so-called Kundalini. There's an energetic, there's prana, and then there's Kundalini. Those are two different words. And so the true meaning of Kundalini is, I believe it's power and intelligence. Those two definitions are inside of the Kundalini. So it's not prana. If it was meant to be prana, they would have called it prana. They didn't call it prana. They called it Kundalini, something else. And so it's not just that you feel the energy and you get hung up on it. It's the intelligence that goes with it. And so that's why I like to use this phrase of the roll up of consciousness, because we're getting past, we're not just looking at the energy. And so I think on one of our last satsangs, Delson said it perfectly. He said, I feel this little bit of something coming up, and then I feel a blossoming in my heart. And so he's noticing maybe a tiny bit of energy, if you want to call it that. And I'm putting words in Delson's mouth now, so he can correct me. But a tiny little bit of energy, and then he's feeling something else, which is not simply energy. It's a blossoming. It's the heart opening. He's coming into love and kindness in that moment. He's describing that experience. I felt this little thing come up, and then boom, this opens. That's more about his consciousness. His consciousness has shifted. It's different. And so that is what I'm attempting to point us towards when I say roll up of consciousness. In other words, and this comes from Ashok, my guru. He said, point yourself to the bliss. The bliss will lead you correctly. And the bliss, when he said that, he's telling you basically the same thing that Delson is saying with the 4 Brahma Viharas. Point to those, look to those. And now when you point yourselves to the 4 Brahma Viharas, again, you're pointing yourself towards consciousness rather than simply the feeling of energy. So energy is okay, it's fine. But if you stay there, then you're missing the boat, because we didn't come for energy. We came for peace and love and joy and this huge, deep, profound experience of the true self. That's what we're all coming for, right? It's not the energy. So energy is just flowers on the side of the path. It's like, oh, there's a flower. Isn't that nice? And you keep going. So I was at I'm sorry, little story. So I'm at I'm at a student flies me over, and he asks me, I keep feeling this energy around the outside of my aura. I can kind of feel it going like this. And he was kind of stuck on it, right? So he noticed it, he kind of worried about it, and that worry made him stick on it. And so I'm trying to relax him about it. I'm like, don't worry about it. Just it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just don't fixate on it. And I went back to my room and I lay down in bed. And as I'm laying in my bed, I feel this energetic sensation in my coccyx. It's kind of like my coccyx, the last chakra, it just opened up and it just started throwing out a lot of energy, just dumping a lot of energy. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I had been on a long flight to get there, didn't care that much. I rolled over, I fell asleep. And I woke up and I thought, oh my God, that's the answer. Maybe he needs this story. So I went back to the student. I said, last night, this is what happened. And, if you've never had an energetic experience before, maybe you start freaking out like, oh my God, my energy is going to go up my coccyx and I'm going to die. Like this is the end and I'm experiencing the end or something. But I felt so many energetic experiences. I didn't even care. I just rolled over and fell asleep. And so you have a bunch of energetic experiences and you're like, yeah, okay, now what? And that's exactly the correct attitude to begin to point yourself towards bliss or love or consciousness or understanding that something deeper is going on. So I'm just agreeing with Delson. I love what he said.
No, and I also just want to add that part. That's actually a really important point that Forrest brought up, which is Kundalini is power and intelligence. So in other words, it's Shakti, like Kundalini Shakti, we call it, right? So that's the intelligence that's available to all living beings. It's not something that's just in human beings. It's in animals, it's in flowers, it's in all aspects of the universe. So the yogic traditions talk about it as being Kundalini, meaning it's like coiled, it's wrapped around, or it's in a coil that's kind of in the Muladhara, in the coccyx. And I like how Forrest is talking about, like, it's the energy part of it that people get stuck up on. And I think for me, for many, many months and many, many trial and error and so much practice, my mind was experiencing all of the energy of the Kundalini practice or of these different states, that my nervous system was frazzled. And I think one reason that could be also the case is because you're coming from that left brain thinking where I have to do this, right? There's this process of like, how many repetitions can I do? How many more of this can I do? How many more hours can I do? And none of the right brain is there to kind of digest what's going on and then bring a more transformative experience.
Perfect.
Well, perhaps I can just reframe it a little bit. I'm a Buddhist meditator, been practicing for a long time. I'm wondering, what is the role of Kriya Yoga in my Buddhist meditation? That is really where I'm going with this. I think you talked in David Johnson's, you said Kundalini does not lead to enlightenment. I think you said it, you fifth or sixth jhana. So do you see Kriya Yoga as being a preparatory for or assist to Buddhist meditation, whether it's Vipassana or Dogen?
So I see Kriya Yoga practice or even the Brahma Vihara practice,
yes,
as preparatory practices, insofar as quieting down the nervous system, quieting down the mind, and then the real work begins, which is to stay in those deep states and allow for insight and intuition to arise. The Brahma Viharas are still just another layer, and they are tools. They are the work to be done as you would till the soil, right? To get to that point where you don't do anything at that point, and you just allow the mind to be, as Forrest would say, the holy potato. I love that, the holy potato. Just soak into that experience. That's it. So any process that we're doing, whether it's Kriya, whether it's the Brahma Viharas, whether it's Anapanasati, whether it's whatever it is, They're all preparatory practices insofar as getting your mind to that collected state, to that experience of dharana, jhana, samadhi, and so on. And then after that, the real work is to not do anything and let the mind be
Okay.
immersed in that.
Okay. Great. That really helps. Now, my problem is not a quiet mind. It's a quiet body. My body is so noisy. It's just constantly these energy currents flowing up my legs, and it just distracts it. It's like a monkey body. My mind, not a lot of thoughts, either visual or verbal, but the body is constantly talking to me, and it distracts me.
I would try
Forrest.
some
Yeah.
yeah, thank you. I would try some Mahamudra. So I have a couple of videos on Mahamudra, and it's a very simple stretch, and you just begin wherever you are, and maybe also some Navi Kriya. So I have videos on Navi Kriya. I just did a walkthrough of Navi Kriya. And so maybe try those out.
Yeah.
And then there's a slightly advanced application of the Om Japa, which is to mentally divide your body in half and then Om into one side and then Om into the other side and then Om into the other side and then Om into the other side. So try those out. So before you begin your meditation, try some Mahamudra, do a little bit of Navi. And then when you're in that quiet state and the body starts to seem like it's talking to you too much, try that Om on one side, then Om on the other side. You can divide the body this way. So Om on the front side, Om on the back side, Om on the front side. Seems very simple. Om left, Om right. It seems very simple, but this is very deep practice because it's wiping out the body. So see if that helps. See if that gets you to a deeper state. And then, of course, let all of this go. And just like Delson said, become the holy potato.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. That is good advice. I'll give that a whir. Thanks so much.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, Gaia is up. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, this was, everyone was awesome, but this was a really great conversation. I'm a householder. I've been married and with 3 kids and a practitioner for many years with kids and life. And I want to thank you, Delson. I feel like you're very transparent and honest with your meditation experiences. And it's not something that I've come across at all. And it actually helped me a lot when I listened to probably one of the first one that you did with, maybe it was actually also with, what's his name, Daniel Ingram on Guru Viking. When you were talking about the jhana and you clearly said, oh, but these are, the jhana can really be experienced by anybody can get there. And until I heard that, I think I always had, it's almost like being a householder. You put a sort of limitation in your mind and your being for that possibility of just experiencing those deep states of concentration. So when I heard that, it just hit something in me. And at the same time, the teacher I'm working with did a course on concentration practice using kasinas that I made myself, like the color kasinas. And, really loved the practice. And then I did the jhana retreats with Lee Bracington. And everything just fell in order. It all, came to me. And I think one of the reasons it came to me is because of how transparent you've been talking about those states. Because, for example, the teacher that I was working with the casinos, like he always talked about how important it is to experience sunyata, and you're doing those, those practices to experience those states where your mind is just very expansive, very quiet. Yeah. And I asked him directly, I said, well, how in sunyata? And he didn't, he gave me this convoluted answer that didn't even answer really what I was asking. And then I think also Lee Brissington in his book, he says that he only experienced the eighth jhana once. So all of that gave me this impression that these were states that were not going to be for me. But yeah, there's so much more than practice to being awakening and being alive in this world. And it's just about being serious about living and interested, actually interested. So I wanted to say that I want to thank you. So that was my point. I guess it's not really a question, but one of the questions, I don't know if you have time to answer, or maybe it could be for another time. But I was looking online at the result from the studies when they put you into the lab in Nerota. I think it was in Amsterdam or Netherlands. And really, there were not a lot of information. So I'm just curious about the value of Nerota. And because I asked Lee when we did the retreat, I asked him a few times about this, and he's like, oh, this is useless. It's not even interesting because nothing happened. There's nothing. And I just felt like this answer did not satisfy me. So I wonder if you can riff on that for me.
Well, he's right about that. There's not a lot that happens in that experience. There is a video that was given as a presentation by one of the lead researchers on that particular research. I don't know, John, did I ever send it to you? If you know, if I send it to the Freedom of Mind group, I might have sent it to me. If you
send it to me, it would take me a little while to find it, but yeah, I can find it.
All right, well, whenever it happens. But in any case, there is by Helene Schlechter, I think her name is. She's one of the lead researchers of that particular study, and she gave the initial findings of what happened in that study. In addition to that, I am working with a microphenomenologist to go through each moment by moment. These people are amazing because they really start to pinpoint like moment by moment. And I kind of like just glance over that, and then she'll be like, no, wait. Go back to just before that microsecond. Tell me what happened there. And she really like makes me go through the whole process. And it's amazing. So whatever comes out of that will be really interesting to see, like what happens a second or a split second or a microsecond before this and this and this. And we'll see when that particular result comes out. But I just wanted to point out one thing before I answer the question about the Nirodha thing, about what you were just mentioning and commenting on, which is I think there is a great responsibility to us as teachers or as guides to inspire our fellow spiritual travelers to say, hey, the journey might be long, but it's not arduous. It's profound, but it can also be simple. And that level of building confidence in a practitioner is so important. So important. So, I don't want to comment on other teachers, but for me, from my experience, what inspired me was when Bhante Vimramsi said, you can experience this sitting at home. You can experience this anywhere. You don't have to be a monk. You don't have to do this. Him saying that, despite being a monk for over 40 years in the Theravadan tradition, and he was a fundamentalist of the highest order when it came to Theravadan Buddhist ideology. Regardless of that, he said to me, and I remember he said to a good friend of mine, actually, this good friend of mine asked him, in order for us to be fully awakened, do we need to join the monastic order? And he flat out said, no, you don't need it. And so he has helped inspire so many people to experience these states, because that block, that mental block, that it's going to take you months, it's going to take you years, it's going to take you lifetimes to get to that. It demoralizes people to practice. So it's so important. It's a big responsibility for us as teachers to simplify, demystify, and inspire through the simplicity of the practice. Now, coming back to Nirodha. So the initial findings, some of the findings they found was that it is different from deep sleep. So they wanted to actually see, is it actually related to any one of those three states? Is it related to a waking state, a dream state, or a deep sleep state? They found that it is none of those. It is something completely different from that. This is what's, known as Turiya in the Upanishads or in the Vedic traditions or the yogic traditions. They also found that there was such a profound level of stillness in the body that even when you're meditating, your eyes might flicker a little bit. In this state, so much stillness, it's like the eyes didn't move a single hair. So that's an interesting piece of information. They did say that the breathing rate and the heart rate were pretty normal. There was no real like a complete gone down to zero, as the scriptures will say, like it's like a dead person. So they didn't find anything like that. And there were a few other interesting things about the alpha band waves and some level of desynchronization that happens where it just decouples both sides of the brain, something like that. I mean, it's just all highly technical stuff, but you might have to just read it yourself. And I found this very funny, was they said it's like having someone had high doses of ketamine. It's like falling into a K-hole. So I found that kind of funny. It's like, now I can tell people, this is good marketing. What I teach is better than ketamine. You can get to states that are better than ketamine without the ketamine. So another thing that they found from another study that they did, not related to the Amsterdam study, but related to Nirodha, is they found that the brain, the EEG information in terms of the brain waves, it's like an exact, what's the word? They're like synchronized, completely synchronized in that sense. So it's like as if somebody is in a coma without being in a coma. That's what one of the neuroscientists pointed out. Like there was this spike, but the spike was not due to agitation, but there was this synchronicity in which the spike was happening, which suggested that this person had gone into some kind of self-induced coma. And that's what they talk about for certain yogis of different lineages, or from through the ages, where they would go into these states, they would dig themselves into a hole and bury themselves, and they would just be completely okay and come out like after a few days, because they had put themselves in this self-induced coma. But it wasn't a coma. It's not a coma. It's something completely different, totally different. And I think science can only take you so far, and the findings can only take you so far in terms of the materialistic, objective understanding. There is something that's beyond science, which is subjective and bordering on the mystical. I don't want to make it too esoteric, but science can't explain everything. But the benefit of Nirodha, I'll just say one thing, the benefit of Nirodha. What is the benefit of Nirodha?
Yeah, that was exactly good enough, my question. Go ahead.
Yeah. The benefit of Nirodha, subjectively speaking, is that you get such an immense amount of rest that's beyond deep sleep. It's like the traffic of all the sensory data that happens through each of the sense bases is at a complete stop. And then when you come out of that, there are certain insights and certain transformative experiences that happen that totally alter or shift one's consciousness or one's perspective or perceptions of reality. And it's also mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. I forget the exact word, but it talks about Nirodha something, where it's like after the process of Nirodha, you actually, they say in very interesting esoteric terms, they say one goes beyond the bounds of space and time and enters into another space or another dimension where they can see the building blocks of reality and then realize the true nature of all existence. So I think it's a pretty good benefit.
Can I ask another question? Like about that,
Yeah.
just since I have the privilege of being able to have this question right now, what happened at the moment where you come out of Nirodha? Is it always the same? What happened at the exact transition?
So in my very first experience, it was not as clear, but as you start to practice going deeper and deeper and continue to do that, there are certain things that become much clearer to you as your senses, your mindfulness starts to sharpen. But if I were to tell you that I saw a big red dog named Clifford at the end of that experience, then everybody is going to look for the big red dog named Clifford in that experience. So I can tell you, but I don't want to ruin the surprise for you. One, I don't want to condition your mind into thinking that that's somebody that's into anybody thinking that that's what they're experiencing.
I hear you. Do you agree that is this something that you have experienced? That I mean, beside your teacher who said that and inspired you, that you find that a lot of teachers don't talk about those experiences, and sometimes I wonder if it's because they don't experience it, or
Yeah,
is there like some sort of taboo?
no, I think there's a restriction
Experiences.
within monastic communities who talk about attainments and experiences. I have spoken about it in some of my talks about what happens from the context of Buddhist understanding, which is how you see the links of dependent origination. And I've talked about it in some other ways as well. But ultimately, it's like the finger having gone to the moon and come back and pointing and describing, but never actually showing you you can't really fully comprehend the experience. I can only give it to you in some level of conceptual understanding. But as Krishnamurti would say, J. Krishnamurti would say, the word is not the thing. The description of it is just from my mental conceptualizations, but they're not the thing itself. And that's where the difficulty lies, let's say. The challenge lies in how you bring it back from that state, what I call the paraconscious level, to now here in the conscious realm. You can do only so much. You can write books about it. I've written so many different things about it, but still, it's just concepts.
Yeah, I understand. But then there is a point where, when you're on the cusp of experiencing those concepts and you know how it goes, it's like through the whole journey, you have this experience and you're like, that's what he was talking about. That's what it was. So there is always that little, sharing those concepts, no matter how obscure they're going to be for most people, most of us. There is a point where it's useful that we heard it, because it's
The
almost
only thing I'll
like
say about that, okay, so the only thing I'll say about it is
Ken
one,
Wilber always, like Ken Wilber, he always talks about the map and the territory, right?
yes,
So
yes.
you show us a map, but then we're like exploring, and then suddenly we recognize the the spot on the map because I've seen the map. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'll say two things about that. One is check out this is self-promotion. Check out my tweets on x.com because some of the tweets that I put up there come from direct like experience. It's like as soon as I come out of it, I just write it down as a tweet. So there's some things there you might see there. The second thing I'll say about it is you have an experience of seeing is one way of explaining it, but there's an experience or non-experience of a complete dissolution of what you thought is you as the ego, as the small self, and coming to a greater realization of the interconnectedness and interrelation of everything all at once. I mean, that's probably one of the ways I can say it. But then you're also having this experience where you go from the small I to the greater ocean or the greater concept or whatever, where you are the source of everything, not only the source of the good, but even the source of the so-called bad. You are the source of everything. And it's okay, totally okay. But it's not from your small mind that you experience that. It is something beyond. That's why I'm calling it paraconscious, beyond conscious.
Okay, thank you. And I see John has a question, but I'll put him off and then hand it over to Tony.
Tony, you're on
Sorry,
mute.
do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, just to follow up with the question of in the lay life we can achieve liberation. Actually the one of the dilemmas or questions or things that comes up as you go through the past is that when you experience those stages and some of them, and you develop some sort of this passion, disenchantment towards the life. You have to go to work with the people who are not in that anywhere near that field. You are kind of like had it enough to be in the day-to-day life in the vault. And you're looking for somewhere to, but unfortunately, of course, you have to work, you have to earn money, you have to have that currency to get by, to buy food, etc. But then a lot of times it comes to mind that what if there was a place you could go and you don't need to do that every day because the level of dispassion and disenchantment just grows as you practice more and more and you go deeper and deeper. I don't know if you had that, and I don't know what the answer is for the people who are in the lay life and how to tackle that.
This is going to sound really arrogant, but I am the answer. In other words, I've had the experience, I've had all of that, but I'm still living a very normal lay life with normal lay problems and challenges. So what that gives you is a certain level of strength, let's say, for lack of a better word, to deal with those challenges and to realize that those challenges are impersonal. They're not really, you don't need to take them so seriously. I mean, if you come to that realization that life is just an unfolding of karma, and it's just a series of levels in a game that you play, then things become a little bit more enjoyable. And I realize, it's easier said than done. But if you start to cultivate that kind of an attitude, doesn't mean that's going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that's going to be all the time like that. Doesn't mean that you won't get upset. Doesn't mean that you won't get frustrated. Doesn't mean that you won't meet with disappointment and failure, but you can recover from it quicker because you have that taste. You have that glimpse to inspire you and be like, okay, this is just for this moment right now. And it's not going to be the same all the time. And that's what cultivates the contentment, that disenchantment. Now, I'll say before all of that, I did have that same attitude, which was like, if only I had a space where I can go into the forest, I don't have to do anything, and I can just be in the cave and meditate, and all my problems will go away, and I'll be great. I've done that for a while. And guess what? I came back, the same problems were there. Some even worse problems were there. So it's just a matter of going out, coming back, testing your waters, testing what's going on, and realizing it's a continual experiment. There is no end point. There is no final boss. It's just a continual unfolding.
Yeah, got you. Well, that's I guess that's what needs to be done. I'm sure even when at the time of Buddha, as he was going around and teaching, he has come across so many arrogant, different people, and I don't know, and he lived through that. But that's day to day, I assume, life. One practical question is that my last question. When I do practice Brahma Viharas, and that's to start the engine and do the meditation, or sometimes I'm lying in a bed and I feel, I mean, Forrest mentioned that as well, somehow a download of energy, or sometimes the energy comes up is so great. It may perceived as sexual energy, or it prompt you want to do something, but how do you, I mean, at that time, how do you actually, is there practice to let the energy just channel out and you just go bypass that, or any recommendation you have when you have got that burst of energy, especially?
Would you mind a comment on that?
Yeah, please, please.
So in the process, so if you look at some of the old statues of the yogis, you'll occasionally see a statue where they're showing a man, a yogi, meditating, and they're showing a full erection in the middle of the meditation. And that's because occasionally the Kundalini will go up the front of the body, and it will cause that kind of, and I've actually spoken to yogis where this happened to. And so hopefully we don't have that level of an experience. If you do, it's okay, it's normal. But one of the processes which my guru mentioned to me was that the chakras are not one thing, they're actually a continuum. And so each chakra has, close to the spine, a small origin, and then they open up and express through the front of the body, which he would call the doorway. So you've got an origin and a doorway. So here on the front of my chest, that's the doorway, all the way back to the back behind my heart, all the way to the spine. That would be the area of the origin. So he said, when you're doing the Om Japa, don't just stop in one place, but conceptualize that you're going to keep oming, not visualize, but conceptualize that you're going to keep oming, and you're going to get it all the way back to the dorsal vagal. So this is really interesting for the Kriya yogis, because when you're in the beginning, and let's say you have a spiritual Kundalini awakening, some energy runs up the body. Or maybe you're doing a practice where you don't have this benefit of getting all the way back to the spine, which the Kriya yogis are attempting to do. So maybe you don't have that, or you're just in the beginning and the energy runs up the front of the body and it can feel very sensual. But as you continue to own backwards towards the spine, and your day-to-day energetic system tends to rest closer to the spine, then you will have the very same experience, the very same energy, and the entire experience will feel holy, because of the difference between being in the front of your body or being in the back of your body. So I'm saying that that energy, if it chooses to go up the front of the body, it will feel sensual. And if it chooses, because of your practice, to go up the dorsal vagal, the back portion of the vagus, then it will feel holy. So that's very interesting. So I mean, we could comment about what to do afterwards, but that's because of your practice. If you continuously point yourself towards the dorsal vagal, then you will tend to experience these things as very, very holy. And so you might find yourself somewhere in that spectrum, or you might find yourself all the way back to the dorsal vagal.
So how do you ohm that energy towards the back?
So just a simple practice, I'm going to start with one chakra. I'm just going to put my mind on so let's say the first chakra at the base of the spine. So I just put my mind there, and then I'm just going to ohm into it. Om. And I might feel as if I have this idea, I'm going to keep doing this. And as I keep doing it, I'm going to get closer and closer to the back of the spine just by my repetition. And then I go to the next chakra, same thing. I just put my mind there, and then I feel it. I feel the chakra. I'm not trying to point to the chakra. I'm trying to feel the chakra mentally. And that creates a connection with the correct part of your brain. And then I'm going to ohm into that chakra mentally. Oh. And you might start by saying it out loud. That's okay. And just sit with each chakra and ohm into it with the idea that again, I'm not trying to visualize it this way. I'm just trying to keep doing the practice and conceptualize that the ohm is kind of like a Pac-Man. And as I keep going, he's going to chew all the way back to the dorsal vagal. So doing that repetition of the John is smiling. I love that. So doing that repetition over and over is accomplishing that. If I have that understanding, it will help me to figure out why I'm doing the Om Japa. And you just do that for each of the chakras all the way up to the medulla. So from the coccyx to the medulla. And the idea here is that this is the tree of life. You're cleaning it out so that you ascend easily back up into the brain, and we experience these wonderfully deep states, which Delson was talking about.
No, that's great. I mean, sometimes it comes when I especially start doing the loving kindness, that's have a different feeling, or when I do equanimity, is a little bit more calming. So I try to calm that. But when I do the loving kindness, that's majority of the time that it comes up. Sometimes I start receiving this energy, and I probably my sixth sense tells me that someone is sending loving kindness, and I talk to my partner and I say, "Oh yeah, I was sending that loving kindness to you at that time." And so I don't know how to close that loop, that I cannot get affected by maybe people that do that, or when I do loving kindness, make sure that it doesn't have effect on me.
I think it'd be cool to actually experience loving kindness from another person.
It is great, yes. But especially if it's 11 p.m. and you try to sleep and you suddenly have got a lot of energy and warm up, and you have to go to work tomorrow, it doesn't help so much.
That explains why I'm awake all night long, because I tell all my students, please send me loving kindness.
That is something that will happen to the yogi. You'll start to get in touch with some of these deep energies. And I realized, oh my God, I have to move up my meditation, because I was getting energized in my meditation, and then it would throw off my sleep cycle. So I was trying to do the meditation quite late. And then I'm like, oh, can't do it. And so one of my students called me up. He's like, I can't sleep. Like I get so energized, I can't sleep. I'm like, and I started laughing. He's like, why are you laughing? I'm like, oh, the same thing happened to me, and I had to move up my schedule. So it's very normal.
Okay, got you. Thanks.
On the other hand,
John, how are you doing, John? How's your energy?
Yes. Speaking of energy,
I was just gonna say, I was starting to say that, it's coming up to 4 a.m. here, and I was starting to feel a little tired. But then, Forrest, you led us through that meditation, and so I tried it. I did it with all the chakras, and now I'm wide awake. And it's like, oh, what's for breakfast? Oh no, I'm on a fast.
We can send you a meta, John, so you can stay awake.
That's right.
Okay, just bring it on at this point. Thank you. So we have, we are coming to the end of 2.5 hours. And Bill has a question, so I think we will hear Bill and then wrap it up, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I'll make this real quick then. The difference between Dogen and Theravadan, the ultimate goal in Dogen seems to be Rigpa rather than cessation and Nibbana. Can you clarify, is it the same goal? There seems to be quite a difference. Cessation doesn't seem to be as emphasized in things like Dogen or Mahamudra.
Yeah. So again, this is a discussion of like doctrinal differences in terms of how people would perceive it. But ultimately, when we're talking about what, let's say, Dzogchen or Mahamudra is talking about, it's more like I call it nirvanizing life. In other words, you're bringing the experience of nirvana back into a more conscious experience as much as you can. So it's just that you have to also understand how Dzogchen and Mahamudra came up. They are Tibetan Buddhist practices which are inspired by shamanistic practices, inspired by Kashmir Shaivism, inspired by a lot of Tantra. So they might have a different context in how they're talking about these different states. And there's a vast difference in terms of the age as well. Theravada is like 2,600 years old. Vajrayana, Dzogchen, Mahamudra is obviously younger than that. And through the course of centuries, there's been a lot of iterations, a lot of different interpretations, a lot of different, I wouldn't say additions, but kind of like PhD contributions to what can be possible, what can't be possible, or, they found other things in how they could describe it. So ultimately, it's all leading to, or the intention at least, is leading towards the cessation of suffering. And that's leading to the cessation of our day-to-day mental proliferation, which is probably 98% of the suffering that we experience in life, and how we perceive what's going on.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you, Nelson. I appreciate that. Yeah.
John, I think you had a question.
I did, but it's sort of off topic. So it was part of the discussion on Naroda, and maybe we could pick that up at another time. And I just also wanted to point out that the link to the research is in the chat. It's Helen
Slater or something.
yeah, I think actually the auto-corrected the spelling, but if you click on the link, you'll see which is a little bit higher up. It's a YouTube link above Laura's. Oh, Laura had a question, which is a little related, I think, to I forget if it was Bill or Tony. Um, what do you do when you are in your 50s, you have an adult child, and there's disenchantment about your household life? You had enough, but it's impossible to become a bhikkhuni. And there's a bit of discussion about how it is possible to become a bhikkhuni in certain places, but I wonder if you just comment on that briefly.
Sure. Well,
that's Laura F. Toad.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Forrest, you wanted to say?
I was just going to say that's everything that we're talking about, that you can do it at home, and you just take your responsibility. You do responsibility. You say, this is my little time for myself, for the higher self, and I lock that away as best I can every day, even if it's very small, and you just keep working on these yogic skills that we're talking about. The HRV resonance, the sitting very still, the Om Japa in the chakras. If you can just get HRV resonance into yourself, into your body, and get that sitting very still so that you can notice the awakening of the parasympathetic system, which is the four proofs that I talk about, then you've hit an incredible milestone that at any time you can enter into a bit of quiet and stillness inside of your body, which will begin to reflect back on your mind. And so if you can do that, you can do it very, very consistently. So I can you practice that enough to you get to the point where I can sit down and I can enter into HRV resonance every single time. You've actually attained something that many monastics never attain. So they might hit and miss, but having the ability to go into HRV resonance in 5 minutes every single time you sit to meditate, it's not guaranteed for anybody just because they become a monastic. So that's a different thing. So if we're talking about actually gaining yogic skills, actually gaining these deep states, then you can absolutely do it at home. And that's everything that Delson and I are talking about.
Yeah, and I don't mean don't mean to sound negative here, but based on her question, I just want to point out one thing. Laura or anybody else who's contemplating becoming a bhikkhuni, that is a female monastic, and I'm not saying this from some kind of male ego. I'm saying this from my understanding of friends who are bhikkhunis. I have one particular very good friend of mine who is a bhikkhuni, and she's told me what the life really is like as a bhikkhuni. Trust me, you do not want to do it because you are not going to get the same treatment as a bhikkhu will, that is a male monastic will. You will be cordoned off as being a housemaid. I'm sorry to sound so drastic about it, but trust me, you're better off. If you want some seclusion, rent out a cabin, do some retreats, do those kinds of things. But culturally, being a bhikkhuni, no, please. Anybody who's contemplating that, not a great idea. John.
Yeah, so I would just say that there are a couple of exceptions in the that are not in Asia, where and one is in the Tibetan tradition. I forget the name of the monastery. Starts with
In
S.
California? Isn't it the one in California?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and starts with S, I think, but I forget now. In any case, there are there are a few others. I think in Australia there's a famous woman who just was ordained by Ajahn Brahm and has started the Bhikkhuni tradition. So if the monastery is run by women and it's not sort of like attached to a male monastery, then and it's Western, then there could be a shot there, right? But again, but I think you're both saying that you can do this stuff at home, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I think we're there. Oh, my time says 4:04, so I guess it's like I don't know where it is. I don't know where the time went. But in any case, thanks everyone so much for sticking it out. We still have 25%, 26 people here after 2.5 hours. So next week we'll be doing the collaboration talk. And so again, I invite everyone to consider over the next week what you might like to see in a collaboration between Delson and Forrest, and in particular, possibly a retreat, online retreat, I imagine, that what you might like to see that retreat be about, or what topics you might like to explore, etc. So next week we'll sort of open it up and see what people have to say, and then take it from there. So thanks so much to Forrest and to Delson and to everyone, and yeah, we'll see you next week. I'll just hand it over to Delson and Forrest for any final comments.
So I don't want to end on a sour note, guys. I just had to mention that because out of sincere care, I just wanted to mention that. So trying to sweeten up the sourness, I'll just say thank you very much, John, because this is like probably one of the latest times that you've been up, and I hope that you got nothing to do tomorrow and you sleep in and just don't answer any calls.
Well, if you could talk to my niece and her family, because I'm talking to them in 5 hours. But after that, I'll sleep the sleep of the righteous.
Good. That's good. Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Delson, and thank you for all the comments, even the sour ones, because that's how we learn the truth. I love it. So, thank you both.
Thank you, Forrest.
Gentlemen.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right,
everyone.
guys.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you so much, everyone. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.